Welcome back everybody to another episode of Direct Comparison. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at Blooper Team's recently released remake of the beloved horror classic Silent Hill 2, and see how it stacks up to the original game first released back in 2001 for the PlayStation 2. For today's video, I'll be discussing both the PlayStation 5 and PC versions of the remake, while also discussing aspects of both the original PS2 release along with the popular fan-made modification for the PC known as the Enhanced Edition. When discussing graphical aspects, I'll generally stick to the PC version of the original game, as this should allow for the clearest possible image comparisons. However, it's worth noting that there are still a few unresolved bugs with the current PC port of the remake. And while the Enhanced Edition of the original game is phenomenal, it doesn't quite match the look and feel of that original PS2 release. For that reason, when discussing general gameplay, aesthetic, and level layout changes, I'll try and throw in a bit of footage from the PS2 version as well. As always, the graphic settings for those PC versions will be pushed up to their highest settings at a native 4K resolution, with post-processing effects like motion blur disabled when possible. Alright, so let's kick this comparison off by first discussing the game's characters. As you can probably already tell, the remake has greatly improved the general fidelity of the game's character models, with massively increased poly counts, advanced animation work, higher quality textures, and superior geometry all around. The hair complexity on James' head has been improved, giving his classic comb-over more depth and volume than the flat design of the baked texture used before. His core design is largely unchanged otherwise, with the same clothing style, body type, and generic-looking face. The proportions of his jawline, mouth, and eyes are obviously all updated, giving him a much more lifelike appearance, though I want to stress that everyman look of the character has been retained, with very minimal artistic liberties taken. One of the most crucial changes, though, that I'll demonstrate later in the video as well, are the newly recorded voiceover performances. This is a major improvement in my opinion, as the original English voiceover lines were reportedly done on a shoestring budget, with a limited pool of talent to choose from, the result being some very unnatural delivery. Many will note that these older voiceover deliveries were intentional to align with the game's dreamy narrative, but according to the original voice director, Jeremy Blaustein, most of the dialogue delivery had more to do with the limitations of the project itself, rather than the game's narrative. The remake, on the other hand, features all new voice acting, with actor Luke Roberts assuming the role of lead protagonist James Sunderland, who delivers a much more convincing performance throughout. Alongside the voiceover work, the game's cutscenes and narrative moments have been redone as well, with new camera angles, animation work, and yes, even some changes to the pacing of the story itself, albeit with relatively few major changes. All these changes are shared with the various other characters in the game as well, who are all fully modernized while still maintaining their general underlying design properties. Maria's model probably has been changed the most, with a brand new outfit, swapping the red sweater and pink cheetah print skirt for a red leather jacket and a black mini dress instead, effectively covering up her exposed midriff from before. As for the bizarre creatures found throughout the town of Silent Hill, the remake does a fantastic job of recreating these abominations, from the stumbling, lying figures that roam the street, to the stalking mannequins, bubblehead nurses, and of course, the infamous Pyramid Head. Every monster appears to be present in one form or another, and not only share the same general design, but appear to behave the same too. They even have a few new tactics to expand on their gameplay systems as well. The mannequins, for example, previously would just stand still until the player drew close enough to trigger them, giving them a somewhat stealthy presence in the action. But now, the mannequins will stalk the halls and position themselves in clever ambush points, standing still and blending into the background more than ever before. The nurses similarly benefit from expanded pathing opportunities, giving them a more natural presence in locations like the hospital as they creepily cross junctions in the path, as opposed to before where they were often just walking back and forth in very narrow hallways. Next up, let's talk about the locations themselves. Silent Hill's world is just as important as any of its creepy inhabitants, and the remake does a fantastic job of not just maintaining that original look and feel, but also building on them, with brand new areas that make the sleepy town feel even more real than before. I absolutely love that as soon as you enter Silent Hill, the first storefront you see can be entered seamlessly, with a ton of detail put into an otherwise useless area. There's no actual reason to walk into the flower shop, aside from a new note page added in that expands on the town's lore. But the fact that it can be explored is a great addition, and one that has been applied to a number of other storefronts and structures throughout the game. I also appreciate the effort Team Blooper put into making every room in the larger interior areas feel unique and distinct from one another. One of the problems with the original game wasn't how repetitive some of these apartment areas and hotel rooms appeared, with only slight variations in placement of object models that quickly blend together as you try to mentally map together the playable space and solve the puzzles to proceed further. The remake does still maintain that maze-like feel of the apartments and hospital buildings, but the way these locations flow together feel more meaningful and better paced, with routes that connect together and drive the player in the right direction naturally. The best example of this is actually prior to the apartment section of the game, on the streets. Despite an incredibly dense fog and large grid-like street layout, I found myself guided very nicely towards the initial story beat with the game's first weapon and enemy encounter. Not with cheesy yellow paint, waypoints, or compass indicators, but with visual and audio cues like blood on the road and quick scripted encounters with the first lying figure. It feels great and aligns with the same design methodology seen in the original, in that you follow a lying figure to the first encounter as well. But the way this pathing is set up feels much more elaborate, and the change up to the fight happening inside an abandoned apartment, rather than that small construction space, works very well. What's more, the developers even honored that original encounter by placing a similar location into the environment right before entering the town, and is even accompanied by a little Easter egg interaction, as if James is trying to remember a dormant memory. There's quite a few of these little Easter egg moments throughout the rest of the game too, with visually similar areas that longtime fans will remember all too well, and finding them all serves as a bonus collectible objective, which I found to be a nice touch. As far as the quality of these locations go, there's no question that the remake improves in just about every way. The opening bathroom and parking lot area provides a clear picture of this, as we can see higher quality texture maps, geometry, and an extreme amount of additional detail added in, that give the locations a much more believable appearance. For one, the actual backdrop of this overlook is no longer limited to an obvious skybox of Silent Hill in the distance, and is instead an actual rendered valley, with hundreds of pine trees blotting the distant forest. More leaves are blowing in the wind along the street, giving it an even more ominous tone, and rainwater pouring down from the rooftop gutter at the corner, along with some great reflective puddles along the asphalt surface, help to really build on that original atmosphere. What's really game-changing though is the new over-the-shoulder camera design that gives players the chance to view the world of Silent Hill 2 from all new angles, requiring exponentially more detail to be crafted into each and every space. The original game's floating, semi-fixed camera perspective gives it a very unique look and feel, as it often limits what the player can see depending on the specific room or hallway that they're in, without being as strict as the fully fixed cameras used in competitors at the time like Resident Evil. Like Resident Evil though, this style of camera made it easier for the developers to scare their audiences, as enemies could be placed in locations out of view of the camera, greatly adding to that sense of dread as players enter a new doorway, unsure of where the camera will be placed and where an enemy could be hiding within that window. The remake of Silent Hill 2, however, faces an uphill battle in this area, as it's now forced to use a more conventional over-the-shoulder design that runs the risk of spoiling some of its creepier sequences. A great example of this is the first encounter with Pyramid Head. In the original, players are thrown into a tiny room with this bizarre creature and forced to navigate around him, using clumsy tank controls and a very limited camera perspective. The remake, on the other hand, opts to expand the space for this battle, using destructible level assets to create a more dynamic encounter as Pyramid Head smashes through items and the player struggles to keep him at bay. This makes it much more action-oriented, like something out of Resident Evil 4. That's not to say one is better than the other, but it is different, and a good example of how these camera perspectives can greatly alter the feel of the gameplay and horror aesthetic of the overall experience, and how the environments are also altered to account for it. Another key component of the remake worth discussing are the changes made to the lighting design. Silent Hill 2 on the original PS2 has a remarkably impressive lighting design for its time. I admit that this is my first time I've even had a chance to experience this game, and playing it on the original hardware, I was blown away by just how good the light interaction and dynamic shadows play out here. It of course does have limitations, especially in how it actually emits from the flashlight and unevenly impacts the environment. But those soft shadow projections were revolutionary for the time, and remain some of the very best on that platform. Fast forward to today though, and the hardware we're using is capable of much more, and therefore the shadows all throughout the remake benefit from plenty more headroom, allowing for more complexity in the dynamic lighting and shadowing that looks significantly better from a technical perspective. When playing on the PC, players can even crank up these effects further, with exclusive ray trace reflections and hardware-driven dynamic global illumination that both offer huge benefits over the general screen space reflections and software-driven lumen used on the PS5. Regardless of platform though, the lighting and shadow effects are well ahead of what was possible on the original PS2 version of Silent Hill 2. So the only differences really boil down to personal preference in regards to the artistic presentation of these effects. Other miscellaneous effects are an important aspect of Silent Hill's presentation, especially the game's iconic fog simulation that has been greatly improved with this latest version, and even adds in some cool new effects like these intense storms that will drive the player towards the next objective, adding a nice little narrative uptick to the expanded opening town section of the game. Other weather effects like rain have also been included, with the hospital section now featuring a full storm that will gradually build outside, as opposed to before where there's very minimal rain. There are a great deal of changes made to the gameplay that feel like genuine improvements too, like adding in new explorable interior locations, removing the loading screens, and reworking the combat controls to require manual aiming, while also adding in a dodge button rather than relying on the awkward strafe from before. Some of the puzzles have been redone too, usually expanding their complexity, while also making the solutions more reasonable to discover with careful exploration, rather than the trial and error that was sometimes required before. There's also a ton of brand new sequences added in too, like the jukebox puzzle in the town area, that feels much more meaningful than just blindly exploring the town like you had to before. It's all very deliberately done to improve the general experience, and aside from a few minor artistic alterations, I do feel that the remake is a net improvement overall. Finally, let's wrap up with a few sound comparisons. Which game do you feel has the superior audio quality and design?
Excuse me,
Oh, I'm sorry. I
No,
was
it's
just...
okay. I didn't mean to scare you. I'm kind of lost.
Lost?
Yeah. I'm looking for Silent Hill. Is this the right way?
Yeah. It's hard to see with this fog, but there's only the one road. You can't miss it.
Thanks.
Excuse me.
I'm sorry. I was just...
Hey, it's okay. I didn't mean to scare you. I'm kind of lost.
Lost?
Yeah, I'm looking for Silent Hill. Is this the right way?
Yeah. It's hard to see with this fog, but there's only the one road. You can't miss it.
Thanks.
And that wraps up this episode of Direct Comparison. Overall, Silent Hill 2 Remake does a fantastic job of realizing this fan-favorite horror classic, lovingly recreating every location, cutscene, and sequence from the original 2001 game, while also adding its own new twist on the experience that feels consistent with that original vision. There are still some issues that need ironing out for sure, especially on the PC, where Unreal Engine 5 traversal stutter is even more obvious than it is on the PS5. But what do you guys think? Are you enjoying the Silent Hill 2 remake? Or do you still prefer the original version? Let me know in the comments section. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this posted every week.